My brother would never marry a black woman. Margaret Wilson snatched the marriage certificate and tore it in half. You're nothing but his black whore. Good enough to hide in the shadows, but never good enough for the Foster name. Faith stood frozen as this billionaire's white family blocked her from her dying husband's hospital room. For 20 years, they'd treated her like a dirty secret. No family photos, no acknowledgement, forcing her to pretend she was just the help while they lived in penthouses and society pages. But what this racist family didn't know was that their black mistress had been recording every word, every slur, every threat. And on his deathbed, Harrison had done something that would leave them speechless. He'd given his hidden black wife 30% of his empire and 18 years of evidence to destroy them. The woman they'd called nothing was about to take everything. To understand how we arrived at this moment, we need to go back 23 years, to a spring afternoon in 2002 when Faith Morrison walked into the Plaza Hotel ballroom for a real estate investment summit that would change everything. Faith Catherine Morrison was 29 years old that day. She was the daughter of a postal worker father who died when she was 16 and a nurse mother who'd worked double shifts to keep their Brooklyn apartment. She'd clawed her way to Columbia University on a full scholarship, graduated in the top 15% with a degree in business administration, and by 2002 had become a junior financial analyst at a mid-sized investment firm. She was brilliant with numbers, could read a balance sheet the way most people read novels, could spot financial weaknesses in corporate structures within minutes of reviewing documents. But by 29, Faith was exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with long hours. She was exhausted from being the only black woman in every conference room, every client meeting, every strategy session. Exhausted from the subtle and not-so-subtle ways she had to prove herself again and again, while white male colleagues with half her credentials moved up the ladder twice as fast. Exhausted from the careful calibration required just to exist in spaces that weren't designed for people who looked like her. She wore her only good suit that day, a charcoal gray Ann Taylor she'd found on sale, paired with a crisp white blouse. She carried a leather portfolio her mother had saved for 3 months to buy her as a graduation present. On her left wrist was her grandmother's jade bracelet, the only valuable piece of jewelry that had been passed down through generations of Morrison women. Whenever she felt anxious or uncertain, she touched it, feeling the connection to the strong women who'd come before her. That afternoon, Faith was scheduled to present her analysis on emerging neighborhoods in Brooklyn, neighborhoods she knew intimately because she'd grown up in them. Her data was solid, her projections conservative but promising, her risk assessment thorough. She knew her presentation was good. She also knew that many of the men in that room had already decided to dismiss her before she opened her mouth. When her turn came, Faith walked to the front with her chin up, her shoulders back, projecting confidence she'd learned to fake so well it had almost become real. She connected her laptop to the projector and began. Her voice was clear, authoritative. She walked them through demographics, economic indicators, transportation infrastructure improvements, zoning changes, comparable sales data. She showed them why certain Brooklyn neighborhoods were poised for significant appreciation, backed by 15 years of historical data and 3 years of her own ground-level research. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Then a silver-haired man in the front row, wearing a Rolex that probably cost more than Faith's annual salary, leaned back in his chair with a patronizing smile. "That's an interesting theory, young lady, but it sounds quite risky. Are you sure you understand the complexities of commercial real estate investment? These aren't the kind of neighborhoods that typically attract serious capital." The room tittered with knowing laughter. Faith had been waiting for this. She'd been fielding variations of this question her entire professional life. She smiled, the smile she'd perfected for moments exactly like this. "Sir, I grew up in those neighborhoods. I understand them better than any spreadsheet you've ever read. And if you'd been paying attention to my presentation instead of checking your phone, you'd have noticed that my analysis shows a projected 23% ROI over 5 years, which is 7 points higher than the Manhattan properties your firm has been acquiring. The risk you're concerned about is actually opportunity that people who don't understand these communities are too blind to see." The room went silent. The silver-haired man's face flushed red. A few younger attendees tried to hide their smiles, and in the back row, one man started clapping. slowly at first, then with genuine enthusiasm. Others joined in, some reluctantly, some with real appreciation. That's when Faith really noticed him. She'd seen him earlier, of course. Hard to miss in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost $5,000, his salt and pepper hair, his bearing suggesting old money and the confidence that came with it. But now, as he stood and continued clapping, she met his eyes across the room. He was smiling. Not the polite golf clap smile of professional courtesy, but a genuine smile that reached his eyes. A smile that said, "I see you. I see exactly who you are, and I'm impressed." After the presentation, during the cocktail hour, Faith stood near the bar nursing a glass of white wine she had no intention of finishing. She was planning her exit strategy when a voice behind her said, "Your presentation was the only one worth attending today." She turned. It was him. Up close, he was maybe 45, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. He extended his hand. "Harrison Foster." Faith recognized the name immediately. Foster Holdings, one of the oldest and most prestigious real estate empires in Manhattan, established in 1891. 4 generations of Fosters had built an empire that included some of Manhattan's most iconic buildings. Old money, very old. She shook his hand, her grip firm. Faith Morrison. What Faith expected to be a 30-minute professional conversation turned into 3 hours. They talked about real estate, yes, but also about economics, urban planning theory, the history of redlining and how it had shaped New York's neighborhoods. Harrison knew his history. He knew about exclusionary zoning, about how federal housing policies had systematically disadvantaged black families. Most wealthy white men Faith had met were either ignorant of these histories or defensive about them. Harrison was neither. He talked about his own background, the weight of family legacy, the expectations that came with the Foster name. His first marriage to Catherine Vanderbilt had been essentially arranged. "We looked perfect in society photos," he said, his voice carrying regret. "That was about all we had. We divorced 5 years ago, amicably, without children." When he asked for her number, Faith hesitated only a moment. There was something about him, something that felt different. She wrote it on the back of her business card. He called 2 days later. Coffee on Thursday? Coffee turned into lunch. Lunch turned into a walk through Central Park. They discovered shared passions: jazz music, particularly Miles Davis, African-American art, the novels of James Baldwin. They argued about economic theory and investment philosophy. The conversation flowed so naturally that they were both surprised when hours had passed. Their second date was at a small Italian restaurant in Queens, nowhere near the Manhattan society spots where Harrison regularly appeared in gossip columns. Faith noticed the choice but didn't comment on it. Not yet. Over wine and pasta, they talked for 4 hours. On their third date, Harrison told her he was falling in love with her. They were walking along the Brooklyn waterfront. "I know it's too soon," he said, "but I've never felt this way. You challenge me. You see through all the Foster legacy to who I actually am." Faith felt her heart catch. She'd been feeling it too. "I'm falling for you too," she admitted. "But Harrison, your family, your social circle, they're not going to be okay with us. Are you prepared for that?" Harrison took her hands. "Yes, I'm done meeting other people's expectations. You're the first real thing I've had in years. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Faith wanted to believe him. She did believe him in that moment, but her grandmother's voice whispered in the back of her mind, "Baby, don't let no man keep you a secret." 3 months into their relationship, Faith met Harrison's sister by accident. It was a Saturday morning. Faith was in Harrison's penthouse kitchen making coffee, wearing one of his shirts and her underwear when she heard a key in the lock. A woman's voice called out, "Harrison, I brought those board documents." Faith froze. Harrison came running from the bedroom, but it was too late. Margaret Wilson appeared in the doorway and stopped dead. The silence was profound. Margaret was in her early 50s, perfectly coiffed, Chanel suit, pearls. Her eyes went from Faith to Harrison, her expression cycling through shock, disgust, and fury. "Margaret," Harrison said, his voice strained, "I didn't know you were coming." Clearly, the single word was loaded with venom. Her eyes raked over Faith. "I see." Harrison made the introduction, awkward and stilted. "This is Faith Morrison. Faith, my sister Margaret Wilson." Faith extended her hand despite being half-dressed. Years of professional training overrode personal discomfort. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Wilson. Margaret didn't take her hand, didn't even acknowledge it. She looked at Harrison. We need to talk, privately. She turned and walked toward his study. Faith heard every word that followed. The penthouse had an intercom system. Margaret's furious voice carried clearly. What are you thinking? That woman in your home wearing your clothes, do you have any idea what this looks like? What it looks like, Harrison said, his voice tight, is that I have a girlfriend. A girlfriend? Harrison, she's... Margaret stopped herself, but the pause said everything. Say it, Harrison challenged. Go ahead. She's completely inappropriate for someone in your position. You're CEO of Foster Holdings. You sit on charity boards. You can't be seen with someone like that. Someone like what, Margaret? Say it. There was a long pause. Then Margaret's voice, quieter but venomous. Daddy would be mortified. The Foster name means something. You have a responsibility to that legacy. Faith stood in the kitchen, hand pressed to her mouth, listening to Harrison defend their relationship. But she also heard the fear in his voice, the way he kept saying, give me time and I'll handle this. Ugh. When Margaret finally left, Harrison came back to the kitchen looking 10 years older. Faith, I'm so sorry. What did she mean, your father would be mortified? Faith's voice was calm, but her heart pounded. Harrison sank into a chair, head in his hands. My family has very specific ideas about who I should be with. It's archaic, wrong, but they're from a different generation. Different generation is code for racist, Harrison. I'm not defending them. But my family, my company, it's complicated. Margaret controls votes on the board. I just need time to handle this properly. Faith felt something cold settle in her chest. But she loved him. How much time? A few months, let things calm down, then I'll introduce you properly. I promise. Faith heard the word promise and felt the first crack in her foundation. That night, after Harrison fell asleep, she opened a new document on her laptop. At the top, she typed, Documentation, timeline. She didn't know why she was doing it, couldn't have articulated the impulse. But some instinct for self-preservation told her to keep track. She started recording. Dates, conversations, promises. She told herself it was just processing her feelings. But deep down, she knew. She was building a case. Over the next year, Faith and Harrison's relationship deepened even as it remained hidden. He was loving, attentive, generous. He treated her as an intellectual equal, but he never introduced her to his family, never took her to society events. At work functions, she was Faith Morrison, financial consultant. She wore beautiful clothes to dinners in Queens and Brooklyn, never to Manhattan galas. Faith kept documenting. Every broken promise, every excuse, every time Harrison said soon or after this next thing, she saved text messages, kept a detailed journal, photographed documents she saw in his home office. She didn't think of it as betrayal. She thought of it as survival. 14 months into their relationship, Harrison proposed. They were at his cottage in the Hamptons. Sunset, ocean, golden and pink, the moment perfect. He got down on one knee, pulled out an antique ring. Faith Catherine Morrison, you've changed my life. You've made me braver, better, more honest. Will you marry me? She said yes, because she loved him. Because the ring was beautiful. Because she believed. But even as she said yes, she asked, when do we tell your family? Harrison's joy dimmed slightly. Soon. Right after the board meeting next month. There's corporate restructuring, Margaret's vote is crucial, and once that's settled, I'll tell everyone, I promise. Faith heard promise and felt her heart sink. That night, she added to her documentation, Promise #1, tell family after board meeting. Engagement date, July 12th, 2003. They married 3 months later on a Tuesday afternoon at City Hall. Faith wore a simple cream dress. Her mother was there, wearing her best church suit, expression worried. 2 of Faith's friends stood witness. No one from Harrison's family. No one from his social circle. We'll have a big announcement at Thanksgiving, Harrison promised. This way we can be married without the circus of a society wedding. Faith's mother hugged her afterward, but whispered in her ear, Baby, a man who loves you wants the world to know. Faith didn't forget. She documented. Married October 15th, 2003. City Hall. No family announcement. Promise, #2. Thanksgiving revelation. Thanksgiving came and went without announcement. 2 weeks before the holiday, Margaret had a minor stroke. Harrison came home ashen-faced. "We can't announce now. The doctors say any stress could cause another stroke. She's my sister. I can't risk her health." Faith understood. She really did. "After she recovers, then. Christmas?" "Yes, Christmas. I promise." Faith wrote it down. Promise #3, Christmas announcement. Margaret's stroke, November 12th. December came. So did a hostile takeover attempt at Foster Holdings. A rival firm made an aggressive bid. Harrison worked 20-hour days. The battle consumed him for 6 weeks. Foster Holdings survived, but the announcement didn't happen. First of the year, once things stabilize, I promise. On New Year's Eve, Faith sat alone in Harrison's penthouse, watching fireworks explode over Central Park, crying quietly while Harrison worked downtown. She added to her journal, Promise #4, New Year announcement, broken, 1 year married, 0 family acknowledgement. Their second year of marriage followed the same pattern. Faith moved permanently into the penthouse, but building staff thought she was his assistant. At company events, she was still Faith Morrison, financial consultant. She wore her wedding ring on her right hand, easier to explain away. At charity galas, when people asked Harrison if he was seeing anyone, he'd say, "Nothing serious," while Faith stood 10 feet away pretending to study a painting. Each broken promise got documented. Faith wasn't doing it consciously anymore. It had become habit. Every text message saved, every overheard phone conversation noted, every financial document copied when Harrison left papers out. She was building something, though she couldn't have said what yet. Year 3 brought a seismic shift. Faith discovered she was pregnant. She'd been feeling off for weeks, exhausted, nauseous in mornings. When the test came back positive, she sat in the bathroom for an hour, staring at it. A baby. Their baby. A child who would force everything into the open. When she told Harrison that evening, his face cycled through emotions rapidly. Surprise, joy, wonder. Then, almost immediately, panic. "How do we—" He stopped himself, but Faith knew what he'd been about to say. "How do we explain this?" she finished for him, her voice flat. "How do we hide a baby?" "That's not what I meant." "Yes, it is. You were about to ask how we explain a baby when no one knows you're married." Harrison sat down heavily, head in hands. "This is wonderful news. I'm going to be a father, but the timing—" "There's never going to be good timing, Harrison. There's always going to be a board meeting, a company crisis, something with Margaret. At some point, you have to choose." "I choose you. I always choose you." "Then prove it. Tell your family before this baby is born." Harrison took her hands, eyes desperate. "I will. I swear. Before the baby comes, I'll tell everyone. Our child will never have to hide." Faith wanted to believe him. She wrote it down anyway. Promise #5. Public announcement before baby arrives. Pregnancy confirmed November 2nd, 2004. Sophia Catherine Foster was born on January 8th, 2005, after 16 hours of labor. Harrison was there the entire time, holding Faith's hand, crying when the doctor placed their daughter in his arms. "She's perfect," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect." They named her Sophia for wisdom, Catherine after Faith's mother. She had Harrison's eyes and Faith's cheekbones. Harrison held her for hours, this tiny human who was half him, half the woman he loved. But Harrison's family still didn't know about the marriage, or the baby, or any of it. The week Sophia was born, Margaret sent Harrison a birthday gift, an antique christening gown that had been in the Foster family for 5 generations. The card read, "For when you finally give me a niece or nephew to spoil, love, Margaret." Faith found the gown in their closet a week later. She read the card. She looked at her week-old daughter sleeping in the bassinet. Something inside her hardened. She photographed the gown, photographed the card, added it to her files. Margaret's birthday gift. Sent 3 days after Sophia's birth. Harrison unable to use or explain. Faith's mother came to stay for 3 weeks. She helped with the baby, cooked, cleaned. But one night, Faith found her crying quietly over tea. "Mama, what's wrong?" Catherine looked up, eyes tired and sad. "That baby in there, she's beautiful, she's perfect, but she's growing up without her father's name, without his family, without half of who she is. Harrison loves her. I'm not questioning his love, baby, I'm questioning his courage. How long you gonna let this go on?" Faith had no answer. That night, she started a new section, Impact on Sophia. She began recording everything. School forms where Harrison's name was listed, but he never attended events. Birthday parties with only Faith's family. The way Harrison would never photograph himself with Sophia, never hold her in public. Sophia's first birthday party was small, just Faith's family and close friends. Harrison came for an hour, played with their daughter, sang happy birthday, cut the cake, then he left for a business meeting. Faith watched him go and felt something harden inside her. That evening, after everyone left, Faith went through photos from the party. Dozens of shots of Sophia with Faith's family, not a single one with Harrison. He'd avoided every camera, a year of his daughter's life, and he'd made sure there was no evidence he'd been there. She added them to her files, or rather, she noted the absence. Sophia's first birthday, 43 photos, Harrison in 0. When Sophia turned 5, they enrolled her in an exclusive private school. Harrison's name went on all the forms as father, but he never attended school events. Parent-teacher conferences, school plays, science fairs. Other parents assumed Faith was a single mother. She saw the judgment in their eyes. One day, Sophia brought home a drawing from art class, their family. Faith was tall and central, drawn in bright colors. Sophia had drawn herself holding her mother's hand, and there, in the corner, so small Faith almost missed it, was a stick figure labeled Daddy, tiny, tucked away, almost invisible. Faith looked at that drawing for a long time. Then she photographed it and added it to her files. Sophia's family portrait, age 5. Daddy figure peripheral. Child's perception of family structure. That night, Faith gave Harrison an ultimatum for the first time. 6 months. You have 6 months to tell your family about us or I'm taking Sophia and leaving. Harrison's face went white. You can't mean that. I've never been more serious. Our daughter just drew a family portrait where you're barely in the frame. She's growing up thinking her father is ashamed of her. I'm not ashamed. Then prove it. 6 months, Harrison. Harrison broke down, sobbing. They'll disinherit me, force me out of the company. Everything I've built. So you'd rather inherit money than claim your daughter? That's not fair. None of this is fair, but I'm done waiting. 6 months. Harrison promised. This time it would be different. He set a specific date. The Foster family reunion in the Hamptons, 4th of July weekend. Faith documented it. Promise #44, tell family at July 4th reunion. But July came and went. A week before the reunion, a major scandal broke. A Foster Holdings property manager was accused of racial discrimination. The story made the Times. Harrison spent 70 hours a week managing the crisis. The reunion happened, but Harrison told Faith he couldn't add more controversy. Faith didn't fight. She just documented. Promise #44 broken, July 4th, 2009. Reason, discrimination scandal. Irony noted. But Faith also did something else. She started building financial independence. Quietly, she took freelance consulting work under her maiden name Morrison. She opened a separate bank account Harrison didn't know about. She started saving money, not a lot, but enough to leave if she needed to. She also documented every contribution she'd made to Foster Holdings, every analysis she'd provided Harrison, every insight that led to successful acquisitions. She calculated her worth. If this went to court, she'd be able to prove she'd earned millions. When Sophia was 8, Faith was offered a vice president position at a competing firm. Substantial salary increase, public-facing work, conference presentations. Harrison's panic was immediate. You can't take it. If your name is out there, someone will connect dots. They'll find out about us the wrong way. Faith turned down the job. She documented the salary she would have made, calculated the career trajectory she'd abandoned, added it to her files. Quantifiable losses. VP position. Offered May 2006. Salary, $185,000. Career sacrifice, #1. Estimated lifetime earnings loss, $2.3 million. Their 10th anniversary arrived. 10 years married, still a secret. Faith had no career trajectory, no social life, no identity beyond Harrison's secret. That night, she threw her wedding ring at him. I've given you everything, my career, my identity, my self-respect, and you've given me what? Harrison broke down. Again, he admitted his cowardice. Again. 1 year. I'm restructuring the company. I'll have control of the board. Then nothing they say will matter. She was exhausted. She'd stayed this long. What was one more year? But she also did something new. She consulted a lawyer. Not to divorce, not yet, but to understand her rights. The lawyer asked if she had documentation. Faith smiled for the first time in months. I have everything. The years continued. Faith's files grew. Broken promise #57, broken promise #68. By year 18, she had a complete record. Not just emotional documentation, but financial. Bank statements, property records, corporate documents she'd quietly copied. She'd spent 18 years being invisible. But invisible people see everything. She also did something smarter. She made copies and stored them outside the home, safety deposit box at a bank in Brooklyn, under her mother's name. Digital copies on encrypted cloud storage, physical documents with her lawyer. She wasn't just documenting anymore. She was building an arsenal. When Sophia turned 16 in January 2021, she learned the full truth about her parents' marriage in the worst possible way. By accident, by overhearing a vicious phone conversation between her father and his sister that shattered everything she thought she knew about her family. It was a Saturday afternoon. Sophia had come home early from a friend's house, let herself into the penthouse quietly. Her father was in his study, door closed, his voice raised in anger loud enough to carry into the hallway. Sophia heard her Aunt Margaret's voice coming through the speakerphone, shrill and furious. 16 years, Harrison. 16 years you've had a child and never told us, never introduced her to the family. Do you have any idea what you've done? I'm married to her mother, Harrison shouted back, and Sophia had never heard her father shout like that before. Have been for almost 18 years, and before you say another word, before you spew more of your racist poison, understand that I love them. I love Faith. I love our daughter, and I'm done hiding them to protect your delicate sensibilities. Married! Margaret's voice was shaking with rage. You've been secretly married to that black woman for 18 years? You've been lying to us, hiding this from the family for nearly 2 decades. Do you understand what this will do to our reputation? To the Foster name? To the company if this gets out? Sophia stood frozen in the hallway, her backpack sliding off her shoulder, her whole world tilting sideways on its axis. 18 years married? Her parents had been married her entire life and she'd never known? Her grandmother didn't know she existed? The family she'd never met, they didn't know about her? She walked into the kitchen on autopilot, found her mother chopping vegetables for dinner. Her face must have been ashen because Faith immediately set down the knife. Mom? Sophia's voice came out small, younger than 16. Is it true? You and Dad have been married for 18 years? Since before I was born? Why doesn't anyone know about us? Faith's heart sank. This was the conversation she'd dreaded for 16 years. The moment she'd known would come eventually, but had hoped would come differently on her terms, with preparation. Baby, sit down. Over the next hour, Faith told Sophia everything. The secret marriage at City Hall with only Faith's mother and 2 friends present. The 81 broken promises to tell the family, each one documented with dates and direct quotes. The years of being hidden, of living in shadows, of being treated like a secret, like something shameful. She didn't sugarcoat it. She didn't make excuses for Harrison or for herself. Sophia deserved the truth, all of it, no matter how painful. When she finished, Sophia was crying, tears streaming down her face, her body shaking. Is it because of me? She asked, her voice breaking into pieces. Is that why he hides us? Why we can't meet his family? Because I'm mixed? Because his family won't accept me? Because there's something wrong with me? Faith pulled her daughter close, holding her tight while fury coursed through her veins like poison. There is absolutely nothing wrong with you. You are perfect. You are brilliant and beautiful and kind and everything a mother could want. What's wrong is your father's cowardice. What's wrong is a family so poisoned by racism they can't see how extraordinary you are. The problem isn't you, baby. It never was. That night, while Sophia cried herself to sleep, Faith made a decision that would change everything. She called Gerald Anderson privately, Harrison's personal attorney, and made an appointment without Harrison's knowledge. 3 days later, she arrived at Anderson's office with 3 large accordion folders, 2 external hard drives, and a USB drive on a chain around her neck. I need to understand my rights, she told him. I need to know what I'm entitled to if I leave, and I need insurance. Anderson spent 6 hours going through her documentation. When he finished, He sat back in his chair and looked at her with something like awe. "This is the most comprehensive case I've ever seen in 30 years of practice. If you fight, if you take this to court, you won't just win. You'll destroy them completely." "I don't want to fight," Faith said, and she meant it. She was tired. "I want Harrison to do the right thing, but I need him to understand that if he doesn't, if he dies and leaves us with nothing, I'm prepared to take everything." "He should understand that," Anderson said quietly. Anderson had a private conversation with Harrison that Faith never heard the details of, but whatever was said shook Harrison to his core. That evening, he came home early and called Faith into his study. His face was pale, his hands shaking. "Gerald says you've been documenting everything for 18 years. Faith didn't deny it. Yes, from the beginning. After Margaret's first visit. Harrison was quiet for a long moment. "You were preparing to leave me? All this time?" "I was preparing to survive, with or without you." He started crying then, really crying, his face in his hands. "I don't blame you. God, Faith, I don't blame you. You should have left years ago." He looked up at her, his eyes red and swollen. "I'm going to make this right, I swear to you. This time I really mean it." Faith had heard those words so many times they'd lost meaning. But she nodded. What else could she do? That was February 2021. In late October 2022, during a routine board meeting at Foster Holdings, Harrison collapsed. The EMTs arrived within minutes. The diagnosis came within hours. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, metastatic. Prognosis, 8 to 14 months, maybe less. Faith rushed to the hospital but couldn't get past the ICU desk. "Are you family?" the nurse asked. Faith showed their marriage certificate on her phone. It took over an hour of verification, phone calls to administrators, but they finally confirmed it. When Margaret arrived and saw Faith in the family waiting area, her face went through shock, rage, and cold calculation. When Harrison regained consciousness, weak and confused, he tried to sit up. "Where's Faith?" "She's my wife. She makes all medical decisions." The doctor looked confused. Margaret looked murderous, but Harrison's wishes were clear. The next 6 months were brutal. The cancer was aggressive, spreading faster than predicted. Treatment was hell, surgery, chemotherapy, radiation. Harrison fought hard, but they both knew he was losing. Margaret hired private investigators to prove the marriage fraudulent. They spent weeks digging, found nothing. She hired expensive corporate lawyers to limit Faith's claim on the estate. Those lawyers spent 3 months reviewing everything and came back with a warning. "This woman has documentation that would destroy you in court. 18 years of evidence, financial records, corporate documents, recordings, actual audio recordings. If she fights, she'll win everything and bankrupt you in legal fees." Harrison spent his remaining energy working obsessively with Anderson on his will. Multiple drafts, countless revisions. He was meticulous, determined to get every detail right. But he also did something else. He gave Faith sealed envelopes. "Everything you need," he whispered. "Recordings I made, documents, access codes. If they try to deny you anything, use these. Destroy them." In early April 2023, exactly 20 years since that spring day in 2003 when Faith had walked into the Plaza Hotel, Harrison's condition deteriorated rapidly. The hospice nurse said days, maybe hours. Margaret showed up that final afternoon with Charles and Patricia, already acting like she owned the place, already making plans. She found Faith in the kitchen preparing Harrison's medication. "We need to discuss arrangements," Margaret said coldly. "The funeral, the estate. Charles has been in touch with our attorneys." "Get out," Faith said quietly, not looking up. "Excuse me?" Faith set down the medicine cup and turned to face her. "I said get out. This is my home, he's my husband, and you're not welcome here." Margaret's face flushed red. "How dare you? This penthouse belongs to the Foster family. You're nothing but—" "But what, Margaret?" Faith interrupted, her voice deadly calm. "Say it. Say what you've been saying for 20 years when you thought I couldn't hear." Charles stepped forward. "You need to understand your position here. We're the legal family." Faith pulled out her phone, pressed play. Margaret's voice filled the kitchen, a recording from 3 weeks earlier. "That black bitch has been playing victim for 20 years. The second Harrison is gone, we'll throw her out on the street where she belongs. She and her mongrel daughter will get nothing, not a penny. We'll contest everything." The color drained from Margaret's face. Her hands started shaking. Where did you... How did you... I have 18 years of recordings like that, Margaret, Faith said, stopping the playback. Would you like to hear more? I have the one where you called Sophia a half-breed mistake. I have the one where you told Harrison you'd destroy him if he acknowledged us publicly. I have 47 hours of you being exactly who you are. She walked toward them, and they actually stepped back. Harrison is dying in the next room. His lawyers have his will, filed and sealed, but I want you to know something right now before he's gone while you still think you have power. She dropped a folder on the counter with a heavy thud. This is my documentation. 18 years of every broken promise, every contribution I made to Foster Holdings that was never acknowledged. I've calculated my worth. $43 million in value, conservative estimate. She opened the folder. His will leaves me 30% of Foster Holdings. That makes me the largest shareholder. Sophia gets 20% in trust. You, Margaret, get 1%. And your $10 million bequest is conditional on you publicly acknowledging us as family. That's not... He wouldn't... Margaret could barely form words. He already did. The will is filed. The recordings are backed up in 5 locations. Faith stepped closer, her voice dropping to something deadly. And if you try to contest it, if you try to deny Sophia her birthright one more time, I will release every recording to every news outlet in New York. I will make sure that when people hear the name Foster, they think of the racist family that hid their black granddaughter for 16 years. I will destroy everything your father built. Patricia was crying. Charles looked sick. Margaret was shaking so badly she had to grip the counter. But here's what's going to happen, Faith continued. You're going to leave my home right now. You're going to let me and Sophia sit with my husband in his final hours without your presence. And when Anderson calls you for the will reading, you're going to sit there quietly and accept what Harrison decided. Because the alternative is that I burn your entire world down. She held up her phone. The woman you spent 20 years calling nothing is about to take everything, and there's not a single goddamn thing you can do about it. Margaret opened her mouth, closed it. For the first time in 20 years, she had no words, no power. Faith's voice was ice. Get out of my house. They left, without another word. Faith stood in the kitchen for a moment, her hands shaking now that they were gone, adrenaline flooding through her. Then she took a deep breath, steadied herself, picked up the medication tray, and walked back to the bedroom. Harrison was awake, his eyes open, his breathing shallow. Sophia was sitting beside him, holding his hand, her face wet with tears. He'd heard everything. The door had been open. His eyes met Faith's as she entered. "My warrior," he whispered, his voice barely audible. She sat down beside him, took his hand. Sophia took his other hand. They sat there together, the three of them, as afternoon faded to evening. Harrison died 3 hours later at 7:46 p.m. on April 15th, 2023. Exactly 20 years after the day he'd walked up to Faith at that conference and told her that her presentation was the only one worth attending. He died holding both their hands, his eyes moving between them, his last breath a whisper that might have been, "I'm sorry," or "I love you," or both. He died knowing that he'd finally done something right. He'd given his wife the weapons she needed to fight his family. He'd given her power. He'd given her everything she needed to win. And she had used those weapons perfectly. Margaret had seen it in Faith's eyes that afternoon, the absolute certainty, the willingness to destroy everything, the recordings and documentation and evidence that would make any legal fight impossible to win. Harrison died knowing that Faith and Sophia would be protected, not because his family would choose to do the right thing, but because Faith had the power to force them to. Sometimes love means giving someone the weapons to destroy your enemies, even when your enemies are your own family. He'd been a coward for 20 years. But in the end, he'd been brave enough to arm the woman he loved, and that would have to be enough. 3 days later, they gathered in Anderson's conference room. Margaret's attorney, Richard Whitmore, beside her, Charles and Patricia Wilson, 3 other family members, everyone who'd ignored Faith for 18 years forced to see her now. Anderson began. "Let's," Faith interrupted. "Actually, before we start, I'd like to say something." Everyone turned. Faith opened her laptop, connected it to the screen. "For 18 years, this family pretended I didn't exist. Pretended Sophia didn't exist, because acknowledging us would be uncomfortable. First slide. Their marriage certificate, large enough to see clearly. Legal, valid, 18 years old. Next, Sophia's birth certificate. Harrison James Foster listed as father, 16 years ago. Next, photo of the christening gown. This is the gown Margaret sent Harrison the week Sophia was born, asking when he'd give you a niece or nephew. You sent it while your granddaughter slept 20 blocks away. Margaret's face drained of color. Faith clicked through more slides. Text messages, phone transcripts, financial records. For 18 years, I documented everything. Every broken promise, every time you pressured Harrison to hide us, every racial slur you thought I couldn't hear. She paused on an email from Margaret to Harrison. You cannot acknowledge that woman and her child. It would ruin us. Make her understand her place. The room was silent. Faith continued steadily. I also documented my contributions to Foster Holdings, every analysis I provided, every deal I advised on, every warning that saved you millions. A spreadsheet appeared. 18 years of financial contributions. The number at bottom was staggering. I also have recordings. She placed a small digital recorder on the table. 18 years of conversations. Harrison's penthouse has an excellent intercom system. New York is one-party consent. Every recording is legal. She pressed play. Margaret's voice filled the room. If you acknowledge that black bitch and her mongrel child, I will destroy you. I will force you out of the company. You will get nothing. Margaret looked like she might faint. Charles stared at his mother in horror. Faith stopped the recording. I have hours of these. All time-stamped, all documented, all legal. She closed her laptop. So here's what's happening. We'll hear what Harrison left. You'll accept it without contest. Because if you fight me, I release all of this. Every recording, every email, every piece of evidence of 18 years of racial discrimination and emotional abuse. She leaned forward. I will destroy the Foster name so thoroughly that when people hear it, they'll think of the racist family that hid their black granddaughter for 16 years. I will make sure every scholarship fund, every charity board, every social organization you belong to knows exactly who you are. She sat back. Or you accept Harrison's will gracefully, make the public acknowledgments he's requiring, and we move forward with dignity. Absolute silence. Now we can begin. Anderson, slightly stunned, pulled out documents. The marriage certificate, which Mrs. Foster has presented. Joint accounts, insurance policies, tax returns confirming the marriage. Next came Sophia's documents, birth certificate, DNA test results, trust documents. $50 million to Sophia Catherine Foster, accessible at age 21. Then corporate documents. Foster Holdings shares distributed as follows: 30% to Faith Catherine Foster, 20% to Sophia Catherine Foster in trust, voting rights held by her mother until age 25. 1% to Margaret Wilson, 5% to Charles Wilson, 5% to Patricia Wilson Davis. Charles started to stand. This is insane. Faith cut him off. This is legal. This is fair. This is less than I could get if I fight. Sit down. He sat. Anderson continued. Mrs. Faith Foster becomes chair of the board as largest individual shareholder. She's not qualified, Charles tried. Faith pulled out a folder, slid her curriculum vitae across. Columbia MBA, 20 years financial analysis, consulting for 6 Fortune 500 companies. Board meeting minutes showing my strategic advice for 15 years. She looked at Charles. I know this company better than any of you. She pulled out more documents. I also have evidence of discriminatory hiring practices at Foster Holdings. Emails discussing avoiding certain demographics. If you'd like, I can file federal complaints tomorrow. She slid an email to Charles from his corporate account. His face went gray. Or you accept I'm qualified and move on. Anderson showed foundation documents. The Harrison and Faith Foster Foundation for Educational Equity. $500 million endowment. Scholarships for black students in business and finance. Renderings showed a beautiful building. Headquarters Brooklyn. Ground floor. The Sophia Foster Youth Center. Patricia spoke softly. He named it after both of you. Yes, Faith said. The Foster name permanently connected to us. Every scholarship recipient will carry both names, forever. Anderson had one more envelope. Personal bequest to Margaret Wilson, $10 million, conditional. You must publicly acknowledge Faith as Harrison's widow and Sophia as your niece. Attend the foundation opening. Make a public statement. If you refuse, the 10 million goes to the foundation. Margaret looked at Faith with pure hatred. You orchestrated this. No, Harrison did. But I gave him the evidence to make sure you couldn't contest it. I wanted him to understand that if he didn't do right by us, I would take it all anyway. Faith stood. You have 72 hours. Accept the will or fight me and lose everything. Your reputation, your social standing, your family name. I will burn it all down. She gathered her things. Anderson has my contact. Choose wisely. At the door, she stopped. For the record, I loved Harrison, despite everything. But I loved Sophia more. I loved myself more. Enough to spend 18 years preparing for this moment. Enough to document everything. Enough to be ready to destroy all of you if necessary. She left them in silence. 2 days later, Margaret's attorney called. They would accept the will without contest. Margaret would make the statement. They would not fight. Faith had won. Not because Harrison gave her everything, but because she'd been prepared to take it. That evening, Anderson called Faith privately. There's one more thing. For you and Sophia only. They met at his office the next day. Anderson produced a sealed envelope, Harrison's handwriting unmistakable. To be opened by Faith in the presence of our daughter Sophia. Faith's hands trembled as she took it. Anderson offered to read it and she nodded. He began, My dearest Faith and Sophia, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And I'm finally free to tell the complete truth without my cowardice stopping me. Anderson's voice was steady but moved. Faith, I knew I loved you within weeks of meeting you. You were everything I'd never had, genuine, brilliant, unafraid of truth. But I was afraid from day one, afraid of my family's judgment, afraid of losing my position. Every broken promise is documented in my memory like sins I'll carry forever, he continued. Sophia, you are the best thing I ever created, but I failed you in every way that mattered. I watched you grow up in shadows because I couldn't bear judgment. I taught you to hide yourself. I'm so sorry. Your mother is stronger than I ever was. Learn from her, not me. Tears streamed down Faith's face. Sophia cried against her mother's shoulder. I can't give you back the years I stole. But I can give you power. 30% of Foster Holdings to Faith because she earned it by loving me when I didn't deserve it. 20% to Sophia because she's a foster, and no one can ever question that again. The foundation bears both our names because Faith deserves to be honored, not hidden. 500 million feels insufficient, but it's a start. Anderson's voice softened. Margaret's conditional bequest? I know my sister. Let her choose between pride and money. If she takes it, she's capable of change. If she refuses, the foundation gets 10 million more. He read the final paragraph. Faith, you deserved a husband who stood beside you in daylight. I gave you shadows. I was afraid of losing my inheritance. Instead, I lost every day I could have proudly called you mine. I hope this fortune brings you joy. Use it to do what I couldn't. Live loudly, love proudly. Sophia, make our name mean something better. Faith, forgive me if you can. If you can't, I understand. But please forgive yourself for staying. You loved me. That's not weakness. My fear was the weakness. I love you both. I'm shouting it now. Yours always, Harrison. Anderson folded the letter, handed it to Faith. No one spoke for long minutes. Finally, Sophia said, he finally said it. Not just to us, to everyone. Faith kissed her daughter's head. Yes, baby, he finally did. What do we do now? Faith looked at her daughter, at the envelope in her hands. We do what he should have done 20 years ago. We live in the light. 3 years later, on a bright October morning in Brooklyn, Faith stood at a podium before 300 people. The building behind her gleamed. The Harrison and Faith Foster Foundation for Educational Equity. Faith was 55 now, her silver hair natural, her bearing confident in ways she'd never been in Harrison's shadow. She wore a navy suit and her grandmother's jade bracelet. Beside her stood Sophia, 21, brilliant and fierce, starting Yale Law School in spring. Faith looked out at the crowd, community members, educators, politicians, press, and there, in the third row, Margaret Wilson, Patricia Wilson Davis, and Charles Wilson. They'd attended every foundation event for 3 years, not warmly, but consistently. Present, acknowledging. Faith began her speech. 3 years ago, I sat in a conference room and made a choice. I could accept what was offered or I could fight for what was owed. I fought, not just for myself, but for my daughter. For every woman who's been told to be grateful for scraps. For every child who's been hidden. She paused. Justice required courage. It also required 18 years of documentation. It required being willing to burn everything down to rebuild it better. Sometimes that's what justice takes. She introduced 30 scholars, brilliant young people receiving full scholarships. After the ceremony, Margaret approached. The moment was still awkward, would probably always be awkward, but something had shifted. "The scholars are impressive," Margaret said. "They are. I'd like to increase my donation, double my endowment contribution." Faith studied her. "Why?" "Because Harrison loved you, because Sophia is remarkable, because I wasted 20 years on Pride and Prejudice." She met Faith's eyes. "Because you were right, about everything. This is my apology. Insufficient, but real." Faith nodded slowly. "I accept it, on one condition." "What?" "Dinner. Once a month. You, me, Sophia, Patricia, Charles, as family." Margaret's eyes widened. "You'd want that? Sophia deserves to know all her family, even the complicated parts. I'd like that." Later that evening, Faith and Sophia sat in Sophia's foundation office, walls covered with photos of 300 scholars over 3 years, students at Harvard, Yale, Stanford, MIT. "4 more corporations matched our endowment today," Sophia said. "We're expanding to 50 scholars next year. By 2030, we could fund 100 annually." Faith smiled. "Your father gave us tools, but we built this." Sophia hung a new photo. The Foster family together. Margaret, Patricia, Charles, Faith, and Sophia. Not close, but present. "Do you think he knew you'd fight?" "I think he hoped. But he also knew. In the end, he trusted I would protect us." Through the window, children streamed into the youth center for Saturday programs. Faith touched her grandmother's bracelet, worn smooth from decades of anxious touches. Sophia wore Harrison's pocket watch as a necklace. Old shame transformed to pride. Harrison Foster spent 20 years hiding love because he was afraid of judgment, afraid of conflict, afraid of losing power. Faith Foster spent those same 20 years documenting every broken promise, every sacrifice, every contribution she made. She didn't just survive in shadows, she used them. She saw everything, heard everything, recorded everything, and when the moment came, she didn't ask for justice. She demanded it, with evidence, with leverage, with absolute willingness to destroy everything if necessary. She got acknowledgement. She got inheritance. She got her name. Not because Harrison gave it to her in death, but because she'd been prepared to take it. The Foster name would never mean the same thing again. It would mean justice delayed but delivered. It would mean a woman who refused invisibility. It would mean that the person you underestimate, the person you dismiss, the person you hide in shadows, that person sees everything, documents everything, prepares for everything. Faith Foster lived in shadows for 20 years, but she used those shadows to become dangerous. And when light finally came, she didn't just step into it. She seized it, with both hands, with 18 years of evidence, with the certainty that she'd earned every single thing she claimed. That was what she did. That was the something that left them speechless, not just inheriting, fighting, proving, demanding, winning.